In this video, you're going to see some specific techniques for searching using keywords in medical questions. I'm basing this example on a question that I received from a student a couple of years ago. She was researching the best anesthetic management techniques for pediatric patients with obstructive sleep apnea. Now, anytime you start searching, especially in something like PubMed, you have got to recognize how the computer system thinks. It is not going to pick out the important words for you. You have to do that ahead of time. So we have a few techniques. First off, underline the nouns. In this one, we've got anesthetic management techniques, pediatric patients, obstructive sleep apnea. Obviously, there's a lot of adjectives in there as well. I'm not going to do best for that. It's going to be a matter of evaluating systematic reviews as opposed to finding all of the articles that talk about the anesthetic management techniques. The simplest search I can do is to take these terms, separate them, put "and" between them, and search them. So let's give that a try. If I type this in to PubMed exactly as I had it typed in the example, I end up with 6 results. That's not bad, it's not great. I am not going to get the amount of research I hope to find. I can't toss out the ones that are pretty useless. So I need to look at my search terms and figure out what I can do better. Part of it I can get by looking at the examples in here. I noticed that there are other terms I could be using, like sedation. There are other terms I could be using, like sleep-disordered breathing. I could also look at specific populations such as children who are obese. So let's take a look at ways that we can change our search to make it a little better. As we go into it, first of all, there are some things to avoid. Don't use abbreviations. This is really a common error in your field. The reason for that is the terms that are being searched. When I look through the results, you'll notice that if I had the abbreviation OSA for obstructive sleep apnea, it would not show up in the title, and it would also not show up in this abstract page. So I would have the phrase obstructive sleep apnea, but not necessarily the abbreviation. So you do want to avoid using abbreviations in your searches. Same goes for terms like PED for pediatric. You also want to avoid unclear terms. These are terms that could have multiple meanings, such as therapy. Keep in mind PubMed will look at psychiatric issues as well, not just the kind of therapy you may be thinking. It'll look up physical therapy. Drug is another issue. Drug can have multiple meanings in your field, and they're not all positive. So you want to use as clear and specific a term as possible without being too specific, and keeping in mind, and we'll see how to broaden and narrow your searches in a little bit if this becomes an issue. So your first step is to think up some synonyms, some terms you could also be using. And I noticed sedation showed up. I could look up anesthesia instead of anesthetic management techniques. Later on, we'll look at how to focus that a little bit more if we needed to. Pediatric patients, I may also look at children. I noticed children was a term used, not just pediatric. I may want to consider broader terms. Instead of just anesthetic management techniques, I may need to consider all postoperative techniques, or all preoperative techniques, or all perioperative techniques. For obstructive sleep apnea, I noticed sleep-disordered breathing was a broader term. If I only had 6 articles in there, I may need to use something broader like sleep-disordered breathing. I may need to use something broader like preoperative techniques. So that's something to keep in mind to broaden your search. Typically, if you have less than 10 articles, you want to consider ways to broaden your search a little bit. On the other hand, if I ended up with 500 results, I would want to focus my search a little bit more. I may want to look at specific anesthesia or a specific anesthetic technique. I may want to look specifically at airway management, for example. Alternatively, I could look at specific populations of children, such as obese children, which was an example in the result list that we had. One interesting thing that you can do with the databases is figure out ways of focusing your search a little bit more. One other thing you can do with your searches to keep you from having to type a whole bunch. Say I wanted to look up children or childhood, because I don't know if they're talking about children with sleep apnea or childhood sleep apnea. I can use what's called truncation, and that's when I use an asterisk at the end of the root word. You'll see this very frequently with anesthetic, anesthesia, anesthetist, sedative, sedation, sedate. All of that starting with the first few letters and adding an asterisk. You don't want to end it too early or too late. If I ended up putting an S at the end of anesthet, I would not get anesthetic or anesthetist, but I would get anesthesia. And if I'm looking for anesthetic management techniques or anesthesia management techniques, depending on the author using it, that could cause a problem. So I'm going to take the searches that we had. I liked using obstructive sleep apnea, and the student I was helping did not want to broaden her search to other disordered sleeping problems. We did want to include all pediatric issues, so I had pediat or child. And you'll notice that that idea together is in parentheses. So I have pediatric or child in parentheses with those asterisks. And then the last concept I considered was anesthesia or sedation. This time when I search PubMed for my modified search, I end up with 189 articles, which is an excellent number. Now, this patron was looking for best practices, and there are a couple of ways of figuring out best practices, but generally I would want to look for specifically review articles, and if I could find them, systematic reviews. So I would take out clinical trials and take out reviews and search specifically for systematic reviews. And when I do that, I have 11 articles. 11 articles for a systematic review is excellent.